Hi, everybody. This is Amy Brand with Jacobs. This is the meeting of the Restoration Advisory Board for Stewart Air National Guard Base. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate your being here. We'll go ahead and get started. So we can go ahead to the next slide if you're on the computer. Hopefully you can see the slides. I'd like to just go over the Air National Guard and regulatory team that's here on the call right now. From the National Guard Bureau, we have Lieutenant Colonel Richard DeFeo, Keith Freihofer, and Bill Meyer. From Stewart Air National Guard Base, we have Colonel Ed Cook. He is also the co-chair for this Restoration Advisory Board. Mike Ottinger and Master Sergeant Sarah Pastorello. On behalf of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have Dan Kennedy and Joe Biebrich. We have a couple of our regulatory staff on the line, and they'll introduce themselves in a minute. Justin Starr from the Department of Environmental Conservation and Wendy Keener from the Department of Health. And then supporting the team, we have staff from Bristol Environmental Solutions, and then also from Jacobs, my company. Next slide, please. So also, I want to introduce the Restoration Advisory Board members. I haven't had a chance to check who all is on the call, but Ed Lawson is our co-chair. Robert Browning, Ramona Burton, John Clark, Laura Garcia, Carla Johnson, Mark Sanchez Potter, Ora Lopez Zarat, and we have two new community RAB members, Stephen Bedetti and Mike Shade, and we'll introduce them in a couple minutes as well. We also have representatives from community groups, Chuck Thomas from the Newburgh Conservation Advisory Council, Bill Fetter, or also a secondary, Jack Caldwell from Castaic Creek Watershed Alliance, Matt Salton and the secondary Manna Joe Green from Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, Jennifer Rollison from Newburgh Clean Water Project, and Victoria Lung from Riverkeepers. And then we have government representatives, Anthony Grice from the city of Newburgh, Keith Miller from Orange County, and Patrick Hines on behalf of the town of New Windsor. Thanks everybody to all the RAB members who serve, we appreciate it. Next slide, please. So I'll just go over our agenda briefly to get us started. We're going to start with a welcome by our co-chairs, Colonel Cook and Mr. Lawson. We'll go through some RAB business, including a summary of the upcoming meetings, news of note, and our recent RAB elections for new community members, and any other RAB member business. Then we'll go on to a couple of presentations, an update on environmental projects at Stewart, with presentations by Bill Meyer from the National Guard Bureau and Doug Close from Bristol Environmental. And then we'll have open discussion with RAB members and then questions for the public. So just to review the process, you can go to the next slide actually. So our process for these meetings is we have the presentations, and then after each presentation, those who are members of the RAB may raise their hands and we'll unmute you, and you'll have a chance to ask your question. We try to keep them fairly brief, so we just make sure we have time to get to everybody's questions. For those of you who are public attendees, there is a question module. And you can type your questions in. Those will be read and addressed in the order that they're received. We typically go through those at the end of the meeting. So we will get to all of those questions. Some of them, if it's something simple that we can answer in writing just back in the question module, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll ask those questions at the end of the meeting. There's also in the online system, there is a PDF of tonight's agenda, a copy of this presentation, an acronym list, and instructions for accessing documents in the administrative record. The administrative record is the online record of all of the environmental documents for the base. And in one of the presentations, there'll be a little summary of that. Those are all available for download in the handouts module of the virtual meeting platform. Okay, next slide, please. And now we'll have a welcome from chairs, Colonel Cook and Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Amy. I'd like to first welcome everyone to our current RAB meeting, Restoration Advisory Board meeting. I'm really excited about the board part of that. Welcome, Mr. Lawson. A special shout out to our 2 new RAB members, as well as our more than dozen staff members that we have presenting tonight. We've got a lot of work to continue to do, and we are looking forward to our continued relationship with our New York DEC and DOT partners as they present their findings and they work with us as regulatory members and partners. I'd also like to just remind everyone where we're at. We closed out the last 2021 with our remedial investigation process beginning. That's the next step in the circular process. And we still have many steps to go, but really excited and proud of the work that we've been able to do so far. So we look forward to some great stuff for 2022. Austin, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. And I guess I could say Happy New Year because I haven't spoken to you all since the new year began. We too share Colonel Cook and excitement, and thank you, Amy, for facilitating with the process. Obviously, it couldn't be fast enough, but we know that we're in a good space. We're moving steadily from all reports, getting information during this remedial investigation process and this feasibility process. We're excited to have the process move forward and look forward to hearing where we are and where we're going. I would like to thank former RAB members for their service. As was already stated, there are 2 new RAB members that will be joining us tonight. And we're excited for their support and service on this very vital and important committee. I'm excited also too because we're getting more traction and sharing more information with the community, and hopefully the process becomes a little bit more demystified with every quarterly meeting that we have and every sort of individual meeting that we have within the community. And so we're excited to continue the partnership. We look forward to the day when this dreaded COVID allows us to be in the same room together to have and have these conversations. But until then, I just want to keep everybody spirit up that, you know, we're moving in the right direction. There's a lot of really positive things happening. I would like to share that in addition to the remediation investigation process of places and spaces that is currently being enacted, we are a part of a multi-site study, a national multi-site study with Hoosick Falls to study the impact of Pfast in humans in the city of Newburgh. And so that study is being launched in partnership with the University of Albany and New York State Department of Health. And as we continue to talk to the community about the remediation process, we do not want to be remiss and not talk to them about health, wellness, environmental, and social justice issues that are also a part of this process. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for your spending time with us tonight. And hopefully we'll be able to get through this together in quick order. So thank you. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Next slide, please. We'd like to give an opportunity to our New York State regulatory contacts, Justin Starr and Wendy Keener, to introduce themselves.
Hi, Amy. Hi, everyone. Well, I think we'll start the show here. So my name is Justin Starr. I am the project manager for DEC for the Stewart Air National Guard base. As many of you know, the DEC is the lead regulatory agency for the Air National Guard base, having listed it as a state superfund site in 2016. So in talking with the Air National Guard, it certainly seemed like right now, as we embark on the RI process, that this would be a good time for a formal introduction for myself and then for Wendy. So I just wanted to give you a brief bio on myself and what the department will be doing throughout this entire process. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology from the State University of New York at Buffalo, Master's of Science in Geology from Boston College, and I'm a New York State licensed professional geologist. Prior to coming to DEC, I was in both academia and spent some years as an environmental consultant, and then finally coming to DEC in 2018. So DEC up to this point in terms of the investigation has been providing comments, providing field oversight throughout the site inspection, the expanded site inspection. And now as we enter into the RI phase, all of that will continue. We will review documents, have, I'm sure, quite a few conversations with our counterparts at the Air National Guard and other federal agencies and other state agencies, and really work to ensure that the investigation, the RI, is up to a level of quality that the DEC both requires and expects. So saying all of that, throughout this entire process, if you members of the public have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out. You've got my contact information right on the screen there. So don't be strangers. We're not strangers. If you have anything, please feel free to reach out. Wendy, over to you.
So hello, so I'm Wendy Keener with the New York State Department of Health. So I'm the project manager for the Guard base. So us, we at the health department work hand in hand with the DEC project managers to review the documents and work plans and information that's coming in. But our focus is more on a public health perspective. So we look at how the data is coming in, how it might affect people, how people might be exposed to contaminants at a site, and what we can do to get that remediated and minimize or ideally eliminate exposures. So we work hand in hand with the DEC and the other agencies. And like Justin said, feel free to reach out anytime. Oh, I forgot the bio part. So my degree is in civil environmental engineering from Clarkson University. I have been with the bureau that I'm in the health department for about 24 years, and a little bit of time at DEC before that. And yeah, reach out anytime if you have any questions, any health questions. My information's on there, and line's open. Happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Justin and Wendy. I appreciate that. Before we get started on some RAD business, I would like to acknowledge that we have some other representatives of organizations on the call as well. We have representatives from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, New York Port Authority. We also have a representative from Senator Schumer's office. So I just wanted to acknowledge. We also have a number of city and county representatives, and probably some I'm missing, I apologize. So I just wanted to recognize some of those folks. So RAB business, moving on. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to review our upcoming meetings. This is the same pattern we've been following for a couple of years. This meeting is actually the one that is always a little bit out of sync, and rather than having it in the last week of January, we have it the first week of February, just to give us a little more time to prepare because of the holidays. But otherwise, meetings are usually the last Wednesday of the month in April, July, and October. So these are the dates for the upcoming meetings: April 27, July 27, and October 26. So next slide, please. So just a couple pieces of RAB business. Just a reminder to, if you have RAB related messages and you need to reach out, please copy both myself, Amy Brand at jacobs.com, but also Master Sergeant Sarah Pastorello. Sarah is the public affairs person for Stewart Air National Guard base. So if you could send messages to both of us, that would be great. There have been some base tours, and many of you are aware or have been on some of those. The Air National Guard will continue to host small RAB tours when possible. It's been a little bit tricky through COVID as things kind of wax and wane and rules change, but those will continue as possible. Our operating procedures, I'm currently working on an update. For those of you who were on our call in October, we changed the name of this group from a Restoration Advisory Committee to a Restoration Advisory Board, a RAB. And so the only change that's really necessary in the operating procedures is just go through and update that name. When we've completed that update, that document is signed by our co-chair, so I will forward that to them for signature. We're going to just talk a little bit again about RAB member elections. And I know there has been some interest in the New York State Department of Transportation 17K project. We are not yet able to have them give us a presentation, but Heather Pillsworth is the contact. Here's her contact information. I know that she actually is listening in tonight's meeting as well. So I want to provide that contact information, and hopefully we'll be able to hear an update on that project in an upcoming meeting. Next slide, please. So RAB member elections. We had, as you may recall from October, we had 2 of our community members who have served. Cassie Sklarz and Ronald Zaria have served for a couple of years and needed to step down from their positions. We thank you very much for your service. So we went through a process to fill those positions. We placed public notices in the newspaper in December. We distributed a flyer in both English and Spanish to RAB members and our broader email list. That flyer, along with a fillable PDF application and a link to an online application, were also placed on the 105th Air Wing website. The application process was open for about 3 weeks, I guess. And so we received 4 applications by January 10th. What happened when those applications come in then, as per our operating procedures, is the applications are reviewed by the community members of the RAB. They review them and they vote on them, and they elected new members, Mike Shade and Stephen Bedetti. So welcome, Mike and Stephen. I believe you're both on tonight's call, and thank you again to your service, Cassie and Ronald. Next slide, please. So this is an opportunity if RAB members want to comment on any of what I just went over or talk about anything for RAB related business, please go ahead and raise your hand. This time again is for RAB members. Anybody from the public that has comments can please put those in the online question panel.
Amy, there's a question from Bill Fetter. Do you want me
Okay.
to read these out? Okay.
Actually, I can see that. Yeah,
Okay.
Bill asked if we could please announce tours to the entire group regardless of attendees so that we can keep track of what's going on. And when there are tours available, we will let all of the RAB members know about those.
Maybe just a quick comment on the tours. We are going to wait till spring. As Mr. Lawson can attest to, it's quite cold and very icy down there right now, and it's not safe for anyone to be down there. So as soon as the weather breaks, we'll schedule another tour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Colonel. All right, anything else before we move on? I'm not seeing any raised hands. Oh, yes, I do. Mr. Grice, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I just wanted to, my computer was giving me some trouble, so I logged on to using my phone. So I just wanted to note that I am present.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on then. Thanks, everybody. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill Meyer from the National Guard Bureau to begin the update on environmental projects. Bill?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Bill Meyer. I'm the remedial project manager for the Air National Guard. And tonight I'll be giving you an update. Next slide, please. So some important links and information for everybody. We've got the administrative record. That's the web page that you can go to see the documents. And we'll have a slide in here that shows the most current documents with their ID numbers on it. And we also, for the interim stormwater treatment system quarterly reports, we upload those to a DEC website where you can also go view that information. And then the Air Force Civil Engineering Center Pfast information. That's where Air Force posts a lot of their information regarding Pfast if you need to get some more details. Next slide, please. Quick navigation aids. So this is for the admin record. Last thing that posted was the final meeting minutes from 27 October up on the admin record. Nothing new is posted since the last two meetings up there. So follow on with the next slide, please. This is just an overview of the circle of timeframes. Right now, where we're at is with RI, start at the beginning of it. You can see on the bottom, it typically shows like years 1 through 3 is when we start the PASI. Years 3 through 6 is the RIFS, and that's what we're in right now. And then it also has the other phases, remedial design and remedial action, as well as remedial action operations. That's when we do a cleanup. And then we go into long-term monitoring. And then the other sites on the top there, site 5 is a monitoring well for, there was a buried pesticide from our IRP program back in the day. Right now we're going to be doing a feasibility study and a decision document on that. And then there's the site 3 former base landfill where we do annual monitoring and testing. Next slide, please.
Bill, before we go on, this is Amy. If you could just very quickly, for the members from the public who are on the call, just explain what's involved in a PASI and RIFS, those steps.
Oh, sure. So preliminary assessment is the initial where we go out and we look at the base and we interview people and ask them about activities that occurred. And it basically just kind of identifies whether there was if we had some type of activity or disposal or something that could have created a problem. The site inspection is it's a yes or no answer for all the different media out there. So for soil, groundwater, sediment, surface water, we'll go out and we'll collect some samples, and yes, it's present, contamination's present, you know, depending on what type. You know, if it was a gas station or an underground storage tank, we might be looking at petroleum. But in this case, we were looking for AFFF releases for PFAS, PFOA compounds. And basically we did that, and we did find it in the groundwater. We found some in the soil as well as surface water. So that SI, the site inspection, is a kind of a yes or no. Once you do that, we need to go on to the remedial investigation, and that's what I'm going to give you an update on tonight, where we're at in that process. So the remedial investigation basically looks at all those different media types and the conceptual site model, and I've got a slide that'll illustrate our conceptual site model out here to kind of give you an idea. And we look at we try to delineate the lateral and vertical extent. So in soil, how wide is the soil contamination? You know, how many feet is it? You know, 30 by 30 area? Is it, you know, we look at all those different, try to delineate where the contamination is. And the same with the groundwater. How wide is the groundwater plume? How deep does it go? Is there a vertical gradient? Is there something pulling the groundwater contamination down? Surface water, soil, all those interactions. Right now, we got a basic conceptual site model that explains what our understanding of what's happening out there, how contamination is being transported from when the surface water, when it rains out and it infiltrates the soil, goes down into the soil, down to the groundwater table. The RI basically looks at where we have data gaps in that, and then we collect the information, and then based upon that, we look at, once we have that delineated, we can make downstream decisions on remedial design and remedial action. And then the feasibility study basically evaluates different technologies and approaches on how we can remediate areas of contamination that are above the standard, whether it's for soil, groundwater, sediment, surface water. It could be a combination of all those things. And it looks at it, and we try to come up with a remediation method that will reduce those levels to be protective of human health. So that's probably too deep. So on to the next slide. So timeline for Pfast. So this is just kind of a chronological snapshot of from 2016 up to 2021. Next year we'll add on 2022 and add some activities. But you can see we did the what happened in 2016, where they did the we identified that there was contamination in the stormwater system and rec pond. 2018, we did a phase 1 for the site inspection. We also did a preliminary assessment back in, I believe, 2016. This is the regional site inspection, was basically that yes or no, is there contamination present or not in the different media. Then 2019, we started the RAB, and then I think they had their first meeting in November to start basically introducing the community to the environmental projects at the Stewart Air National Guard base. Then in 2020, they established the RAB. I guess 2019 they were planning to do the RAB, and then we did an expanded site inspection where we needed to collect some additional data for the SI. And then we started the interim stormwater treatment system at Rec Pond, came online in July. And then this year, 2021, we completed a relative risk site evaluation where it went out for public comment period. We also completed the community involvement plan. That community involvement plan is what the base uses to communicate restoration activities, whether it's PFAS related or non-PFAS. And also in 2021, we were approved to funding for Defense Environmental Restoration Program funding to do the RI. And that's when the contract was awarded 30 September 2021 to bring on AECOM to work on the remedial investigation. So next slide, please. So I'm going to jump into kind of an update on the PFOA/PFAS remedial investigation. Next slide. So RI status update. Right now we're gathering data and kind of in the planning phase. We did a kickoff meeting in November of 21 with the Army Corps of Engineers and AECOM, as well as the regulators. We met with those folks. We did some site visits in November and December to gather more information and help scope out RI remedial investigation sampling locations. And right now, AECOM's preparing this Unified Federal Policy Quality Assurance Project Plan, UFP-QAP. You'll hear that quite a bit during the RI process. And the next slide, I'm going to kind of go into some details on what's in a UFP-QAP. Next slide, please. So here are the elements, typically what you see in a UFP-QAP. The UFP-QAP is basically like our work plan that lays out our sampling methodology, how we do our health and safety, how we manage investigative derived waste, how we're going to do the human health risk assessment, our conceptual site model. Remember I talked about that, and the identification of data gaps. And the really key one is the data quality objectives. Data quality objectives are basically how much data, what do we need to answer the questions to collect the information on where the data gaps are. So if you see listed below data quality objectives, how it says to state the problem, identify the goals, and then identify inputs, define boundaries, develop an analytical approach like the laboratory methods, how we're going to do stuff, and then specific performance and acceptance criteria, as well as the detailed plan on how we're going to collect that. So basically with the maps and the figures on where we're going to put our monitoring wells, how are we gonna delineate groundwater contamination below the subsurface? Where are we gonna do additional surface water sampling, sediment sampling? And then also, as part of this process, when we're developing this UFP QAP, we have our technical partnering and working meetings. So we work with DEC and the Department of Health, and we talk to them about what our approach is. We present it to them and said, here's our approach, here's the way we see it, here's what the conceptual site model is, here's where we think there are data gaps, and here's how we're going to collect that information to fill those data gaps, so we can have a solid picture and have everything delineated to the extent necessary to make decisions to move on to the next step. Next slide, please. So this, and the text is kind of small, I don't know if we can zoom in on it, but these are all the different worksheets that are part of the UFP QAP. This, basically these worksheets, it's a standard. So you go anywhere in the nation for a UFP QAP and you'll see these worksheet names. So it doesn't matter what base, it could be an Army base, it could be a Navy base. UFP QAPs use these standardized worksheets. So just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the different things that we're talking about. So then, they have sampling design, worksheet number 17, sampling design and rationale. Worksheet 36, data validation procedures. There's a worksheet 15 talks about screening limits and laboratory, detection limits and quantitation limits for the lab. We got to kind of go into all that detail, and that's what our contractors use to communicate to the regulators. Here's how we're going to do business out there. So it's in one place, and then the site-specific stuff with the figures and all that, that's where we lay out, okay, here's the soil sample locations. Here's where we're going to put monitoring wells after we delineate the groundwater plume. So there's a lot of information. It's a large document, and it takes some time, but that's our planning document. And the great thing about it is that UFP QAP stays with us through the duration of the project, all the way up to remediation. So what we end up doing at later stages in the process, so let's say we go to Pfast or we go to remedial design or remediation, if there's something new in there, we just update the UFP QAP. There's a new sampling method. So for like if we had a groundwater treatment system, we would add in how we're going to collect, there'd be a worksheet on how we are going to do influent and effluent groundwater samples and all the specifics that we want to do. So it's kind of a unique document, and then multiple contractors can use it too. So if another contractor comes on board, we've already negotiated an agreed upon process on how we're going to do stuff. So basically, we're always using this as a living, breathing document, and we provide updates as needed if we do something different that's not on this document. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the general conceptual site model. Just kind of an overview. It's a 3D, it shows a cross section here. And basically, so you see they got the clouds at the top with the rain coming down. The little cloud on the ground shows the AFFF. So if we disperse and use AFFF, goes onto the concrete. And then we see like a fracture in the concrete. So surface water carries the AFFF into the crack in the pavement. And then it migrates vertically because there's that vertical component for surface water, infiltrates into the soil and kind of works its way down to the water table. And you can see where the water table is. There's that little blue triangle. That's where the top of the water table is. And then the little pink plume shows, what we think, the plume might be. How deep is it? So remember I talked about vertical and horizontal extent. These are the things that we're going to be looking at for the RI to try to have a good finger on. So, and on here, just to point out, you can see where the question marks are. Wherever there's question marks on here, those are data gaps. So in our conceptual site model, our RI is going to look at collecting information where those question marks are. You can also see the stormwater, like the crack in the stormwater pipe. So if you got contaminated stormwater with AFFF, it might leak out through that. So we think we may have some of that going on at the site. And then you can see rec pond, how the stormwater discharges into rec pond, and all those interconnections. So those are the things that we're going to be looking at, trying to get a better handle on and more information during the remedial investigation. But this kind of just gives you a 3D look at it. Sometimes pictures are a lot easier to explain some of the things that we're trying to do out here. Next slide, please. I think this is the last one.
Sorry, I gotta.
Too much memory on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so data quality objectives. So I talked about the conceptual site model where the data gaps were. So we use these data quality objectives, or what we're telling the regulators, here's what we need to do. This is a data quality objective and it's a data gap that we have. So we want to delineate validated PFAS areas of concern. So the left and right, vertical and lateral extent, and then also in the various environmental media. So we're going to use soil, groundwater, surface water sampling to do that. Then we're going to attempt to delineate to the fullest extent practical the PFAS impacts from the Air National Guard mission related activities. And looking at the hydrogeology, the physical conditions under the subsurface. Looking at the overburden and then also into the bedrock. I mean, that's another data gap. Is there a vertical component that's dragging PFAS contamination down towards that weathered zone where the bedrock soil interface is at depth? We don't know, but we're going to collect information in the RI to answer those questions. Also collecting some additional hydrogeologic data, get a better handle on groundwater flow direction, groundwater velocities, gradients. Is there a vertical gradient or is there a positive? Sometimes there might be an upward gradient where hydrogeologic conditions create an upward gradient, or it creates a vertical gradient. So there's all kinds of things that we got to get more information on that we don't have enough data on. So, and then also we're going to look at collecting additional data and inspection of stormwater conveyance. So looking at some of the stormwater piping and the outfalls, and then the receiving waters. Next slide, please. So here's a preliminary RI schedule. Kind of already talked a little bit about this. So contract was awarded 30 September 2021. AECOM started working November 21 on the UFP QAP. We think that's going to go all the way through July of 22. Right now, I think we owe DEC and Department of Health a draft, and also to the RAB. So when a draft of the UFP QAP sometime in May. So lots of different stakeholders internally within the Air Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers that has to review and put their hands on this document. But in the meantime, we are working with the regulators. We're going to do a technical project planning session with them as we develop this UFP QAP to kind of get their input and what their concerns and issues are, and kind of just give them an overview of here's what we're planning on doing, and having that direct interaction with them. It's better to do it that way and then handing them a document, go, here, read this, tell us what you think. Sometimes people do that, and that's not the best way to do business. So the regulators sometime during May should get a draft of this, as well as the RAB. So when the UFP QAP draft comes out, we'll make sure that it's available to the RAB members when it goes to the regulators as well. And then we got a field mobilization in the fall of 22. We'll better be able to shake that down once we go through this UFP QAP review. And then probably potentially a second mobilization the spring and summer of 23. And these are some subsequent ones. Now, these may not all necessarily happen because I said in previous discussions, this remedial investigation is an iterative process. So we're going to do our best during the first phase of this to try to collect all the information that we need. But more than likely, we'll have to come back out and go, hey, you don't have enough information on this. We didn't quite answer this, or we didn't delineate the groundwater plume enough. We're still short. So it's kind of an iterative process. So we've built in at least 4 different iterations or mobilizations to come and collect the information that we need to do. Does it mean that we're going to do all 4? I mean, if we collect the information and we've adequately delineated it during the first one or the second one, we just built this in because the contractor AECom's under contract to do a complete RI on this. So we kind of planned accordingly, and if we have to do all the mobilizations, then so be it. Or if we can finish just with 2, then that's what it'll take. But we'll be working with the regulators on that. And then there's a Lysometer study. Lysometer is basically, when I described the hydrological cycle. So when it rains and you got surface water that infiltrates into the soil, lysometers measure that surface water coming down through the soil, vertically migrating downward before it gets to the water table. So it allows us to measure basically the surface water quality from what's infiltrated into the soil before it reaches the water table. So it's almost kind of like a preview of what the surface water quality looks like that's infiltrated into the soils before it hits the water table, just to kind of give you an idea of that. Then the fall of 24, worst case is when we'll do the remedial investigation draft report. That report could come earlier if we only do 2 mobilizations. So it's a tentative schedule. If you can move on to the next slide, I think it's questions after this. Yep. So I'm open for questions. I see a few in the
Okay. Well, let's start with RAB members. Please raise your hand if you have questions. And there are a couple in the chat that have been coming in as well, and we may be able to address those now. Okay, Anthony Grice, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I did. Thank you. And so you gave a timeline, which is great. I do wish, as an aside, because we do have the public listening, and while we on the RAC know what AFF is, sometimes giving that definition for the public. But my question is, because you gave the timeline, are you on schedule for everything, or are you behind on schedule?
No, we're on time. We did the project management plan, turned that in. That's how we got the schedule, and right now we're tracking. So there hasn't been any deviations from the schedule so far. So we're on schedule.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bill Fetter, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, Bill, why is the Lycimeter plan so late in the project? Why isn't it done up front? And is it the same contractor?
It's the same contractor, and they just put it at the end because once we got groundwater delineated, then we'll be able to put it in where the areas of the highest soil, where we think the highest soil concentrations are. So between the monitoring well data, the groundwater quality data, as well as the soil data, kind of put that last so we can place them in both up gradient and down gradient locations to get a better snapshot of what's going on. If we do it up front and the plume's bigger or longer, or we got a higher concentration, it has to come after we're done with the monitoring wells and the soils. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Or?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, Mike Shade.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I can.
Great. Well, one, thank you so much for the RAB electing me to join the community committee. Really appreciate it. Quick question that I had is, I saw that, throughout the development of the co-op, there's quarterly meetings with DEC, Department of Health, and other stakeholders to review the proposed sampling plan. And I guess, my question is, what opportunities are there for members of the RAB and the public and other elected officials to review the draft sampling plan and provide input? Will there be any formal public comment period to weigh in on the sampling plan? How can the RAB and other stakeholders meaningfully engage in the process?
Right. So when I talked about the May date, this May, we're supposed to have a draft UFP QAP. We're going to send that out, make it available to the RAB members to look at. We don't, part of the circular process for RI work, the UFP QAP, we don't go out for public comment. But you all, as RAB members, and we can post it, I mean, you can provide comments on it. I mean, we do that with I think we've done that with all of our documents so far, for the most part.
And you're saying that that'll be sometime in May, is that right?
Yeah, in May. I don't have the specific date, but that's May timeframe is when we're going to have a draft to the DEC and the DOH. And we'll also provide the RAB with that document. Now, we're not posting a draft to the admin record because the admin record's only for final documents. So, but we'll take your comments.
Okay. And Bill, while we're at it, I think Mike's submitted a question just clarifying AECOM is not in our acronym list. I know it is the name of the contractor.
Yes.
So.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I don't see any other hands raised from RAB members. Anybody else have any questions? RAB members have questions at this time. Public questions, we will address your questions at the end. Thank you very much. We are keeping track of those. So if it says that it's been added to the queue, we'll touch base with that. There was one from Chuck Thomas asking what the UFP QAP was, and I think that Bill has explained that. Chuck, raise your hand if you had any other questions about it. Otherwise, we'll move on. Oh, okay, Chuck. Go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had lowered my hand.
Oh, that's fine.
If you could just go over the UFP QAP one more time real quickly, if you would. What the acronym stands for.
Yeah, go back to the couple slides back, Amy, if you can, or somebody. One more. There you go. So that's the elements of the UFP QAP. It talks about sampling methodology, health and safety plans in there, investigative derived waste, conceptual site models, identification of data gaps, data quality objectives, where are our data gaps in the conceptual site model. And then it talks about how we do all the sampling. So like the drilling, if I'm going to install a monitoring well, how is AECOM going to install a monitoring well? It lists out all the detailed procedures of how they're the utilities, then they mark the location, the base okays the location, then they go and they do continuous sampling when they drill. And here's how they build a well, and monitoring wells are going to build by X method, and here's how we're going to develop the monitoring wells, all that stuff. Here's how we're going to collect a groundwater sample, a low flow groundwater sample. We're going to monitor these parameters for these It spells out all the details on there so the regulator can actually see it in advance. Here's how we're going to collect samples. Here's how I'm going to collect a sample. So that's basically like our work plan. So
thank you, Bill. I understood what the work plan was. I was looking for the acronym UFP.
Oh yeah, that's Unified Federal Policy Quality Assurance Project Plan.
Thank you. That was what I was after. Thank you so much. All right.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Okay. Jennifer Rollison, I don't see that your hand's raised, but I did see that you have a question. So, oh, there's your hand. Go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so forgive me. I just have a question because in the map that you showed, or the diagram explaining how the PFAS is underground, etc. With all of this investigation, this is also an area, it's a large area from the base all the way to Washington Lake, and there's obviously desire for, businesses and stuff to develop there. Is there any concern that you'll come to any kind of conclusion and then in the future developments, digging, whatever in these specific areas may bring up the PFAS into an area that maybe previously wasn't located or detected?
No, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Hey, Amy, can you put the conceptual site model back up just to? if you need it for reference, I guess. So if we have contamination that's off base, we're going to address it and deal with it. Now, is it, you're talking, if there's like soil contamination, then a developer, if it's off base, I don't know if we have soil contamination off base because most of the releases were on the base, but underground, there could definitely be groundwater contamination off base under a property. Typically, what we do is we work with the regulators on that. I mean, we're gonna come up with a remedy that'll will remediate, the soil and groundwater. And if it's off base, sometimes they can do they would do like a land use restriction. Let's say if we haven't got it cleaned up yet, I mean, they're going to let people know, hey, this plume goes. We do this all over the nation. We let folks know that if it's there, but we're trying to clean it up. So at the end of the day, I mean, we would work with the regulators on folks, let them know, and that's downstream from now. I mean, we don't know how far and has it impacted, like drinking water quality and all that kind of stuff. So to kind of answer your question, we're not going to leave contamination in place and just tell someone, hey, we're restricting your property. You can't do anything with your property because of what we created. We're going to try to address it through the remediation process.
Right. I appreciate it. It's a lot of question marks in the diagram. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all part of the, got to answer those, right?
Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. We have hands raised from Bill Fetter and Mike. I'm going to go ahead and call on you, but let's keep it a little bit brief so that we can move on. Bill, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself, Bill?
Thank you. At this point, we could probably color Rec Pond and Silver Stream and Washington Lake pink, right?
Say that again.
At this point, we could label, or you could color Rec Pond, Silver Stream, and Washington Lake pink. If you're using the pink to indicate contamination.
Nah, the pink was just a groundwater plume.
Well, that means there's no, well, okay, all right. I a little disagree with the idea, but okay, enough said. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and Mike Shade?
Hi, just to get back to the timeline question a little bit. So just to clarify, so if the draft sampling plan, the QUAP, is expected to be complete around May, does that mean that the July meeting that the RAB would be holding, would we be focusing on that at that meeting? One thing that I just worry a little bit about is I know the summer is a time when many people take vacation. So I just hope that if that's true, that as many RAB folks would be able to participate. So I'm just looking at the timeline. I'm just curious if we would anticipate the July meeting would be when we'd really be digging into this among the RAB.
Well, we haven't come up with the topics for the July meeting, but it definitely would be a topic since the draft will be out in May, so.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
One comment on that is that these presentations, these meetings are posted on YouTube, and the presentations are available, and we accept comments or questions related to the meeting for up to about a week and a half after the meeting. So even when somebody is not available to attend the meeting itself, there is still an opportunity to participate. Just a reminder on process, we're going to move on at this point. There's more opportunity toward the end of the meeting for RAB members to ask their questions, to raise their hand and ask their questions verbally as they have here. For those who are participating from the public, if you are not a member of the RAB, Please type your questions into the question module. Those will be read at the end of the meeting and addressed as well. So thanks very much. I appreciate it. So at this point, we'll move on to our next presentation. Doug Close will present about the interim stormwater treatment system at RAC.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see you again. Doug Close with Bristol Environmental Solutions. We're going to give you a quarterly update on the interim stormwater treatment system. Next slide, please. This report is data presented representing our last quarter. That was the period of October 1 through December 31. From the beginning of the system coming online in July 2020 through that quarter, we treated approximately 221 million gallons, and water treated during that 3-month period of the last quarter was 39 million gallons. We did take the opportunity for our granular activated carbon, also known as our GAC, and our ion exchange resin to be changed out in November of 2021. To date, we have done 5 media exchanges, and that's been performed since we first started and includes our commissioning period in 2019. Next slide, please. A slide that you guys are familiar with is our sampling results. So on the left-hand side, we show the influent concentrations of combined PFOS and PFOA levels per the date of our sampling event. The average over that 3-month period still staying pretty consistent, right around 300. This quarter was 296 parts per trillion as an average of raw water with PFAS, PFOA levels. Our influent, which is the post-treatment sample, continues to perform excellent. Our average level for detection for the 3-month period was below 1 at 0.24 parts per trillion. Next slide, please. Actually, before I get into this, because I think I have some time, can we go back one slide? Just talking about influent and some of the outliers. If you see on the influent level around October 26, it's much lower than the others, as well as 12/21. We found, that we can associate those with some of our storm events. So let's go to the next slide. Remembering 10/26, we can see in event B, that water influent was a little bit reduced with a 4-inch rain event over a two-day period, which shows how we had drawdown. That storm event, raised the water level in the pond quite a bit. Again, our major weather events posted on the left-hand side were all rain through the fall season. You can see B, and over on E, we had some pretty good water increases. A lot of the stormwater inflow remained right about our weir level. And that was just that we not only had the events that you see on the left-hand side, but you continue to get a pretty large inflow of stormwater in between the events. Next slide, please. Media replacement happened in November. For those that were on one of our first tours during a media exchange, you can remember the left-hand photo. That's our vacuum. The vacuum is used for both taking out media from the vessels and replacing it with new media. This picture display is of us cleaning the sand filters, removing the sand, cleaning the vessels, and really getting into some small parts and pieces of the equipment where we would take them apart and clean them by hand. Next slide, please. Media disposal has been talked about, so we wanted to give you a little bit of update. This media disposal for bag filters and our sand filter media continues to go to our facility for thermal destruction at a Covanta facility. Our resin is also continuing to go to the same facility that we have since the beginning. One new development since the granular activated carbon is our largest bulk or our largest waste stream. We're going to this last change out. We're taking this material and we have negotiated with Calgon Carbon to reactivate this spent media. It goes through a very similar thermal destructive where it takes the absorbed chemical off the carbon, and that carbon can be used in other applications for other remediations or other purposes. And that Calgon facility is also an approved facility. Next slide, please. We've been using a series of guidance since we're been out on the job site in determining, how we go about choosing media waste streams, developing our own UFP QAP and the like. One of those primary documents has been the EPA guidance document. And we just put that up there for your reference. Next slide, please. A little quicker than usual, but that's all we have to report for this quarter. I'm available for questions.
Okay, again, this is an opportunity for RAB members to raise their hand and ask questions. And I also wanted to circle back. Mr. Lawson had a question, and I did not see his request at the last moments, at the last time we had a chance for questions. So Mr. Lawson, if you have a question, you may go ahead.
I'll defer because my question is about the last section, so I'll defer to anyone else first.
Okay. Okay, questions about the interim stormwater treatment system? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, I apologize, I am. I need to scroll down a little bit. Okay, Jennifer Rollison.
Hi, so there's the NDAA, which was the National Defense budget that was passed in December, correct? Which also covers incineration of PFAS materials. There's to be a moratorium, and that would be coming into effect February 26th of this year. How is that going to play out with this? Because at that point, you would no longer be permitted to be incinerating PFAS material waste, right?
Well, we're well aware that we have changing regulations on the horizon. Part of why we always lean forward to look at different options, what's acceptable. All I can really say is that, yeah, we're monitoring and predicting that we'll have some changes along the way, especially when PFAS becomes regulated waste.
Well, I mean, in this case, what I'm trying to say is it was passed and there was a 60-day period when then it would need to be, I guess, begun. It would be initiated, which brings you to the 26th of February. Has there been any discussion in regards to this? Because we brought up our concerns as a community, not wanting to bring the burden of PFAS into another community. And I was a little bit shocked to find out this in other meetings. I'm not the professional. So given that we brought this up several times before our concerns and it was never, there must be someone who was aware of this coming. So what are the plans moving forward?
Yes, I'll take that one. This is Lieutenant Colonel Rich DeFeo. Good evening. So yes, we are aware of the changes and we will work with the disposal facility because the changes that affect us will affect them. Incineration is one means, and as that no longer becomes available, there are other means that could be available to us, whether that's burying in a landfill, or storing on site or storing on locations until other means become available. So we will not go against the NDAA when incineration is not allowed.
Okay, thanks, Colonel DeFeo. Thomas, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. I had the similar question as Jennifer had, and I'm not sure that I'm following the answer exactly. I mean, it's been shown that the incineration releases PFOA's chemical compounds into the air. So it's been clearly stated that they're going to phase that out, and that's been a concern we had. When is your next material exchange? When are you next changing out the filter so you will have material? And I'm hoping that we have a plan in place to have that material either stored on site or taken somewhere. And I'm certainly not encouraged to put it in a dump somewhere. I think we have to have on-site storage for that. It's my feeling. I'm not an expert, but I just wanted to have a little bit more feelings on that. It's becoming a national issue. Thank you.
Well, we've been doing media changeouts approximately every 4 months. Doug, you can probably talk to when the next one will be, but whatever the approved method at the time or allowable method at the time is what will certainly be followed. Storage on site, whether that's in approved containers, storage on site at the temporary storage disposal facility or a TSDF, wherever that storage may be, will also be in approved containers. Incineration, that goes into a deeper conversation about why it's not allowed, temperatures that they're not able to be reached, incineration temperatures that can't be reached for proper breakdown of the chemical, which is why they're not allowed so far. So it goes above a little bit this forum right at this moment until we can get a better handle on what the next procedure will be.
Yeah,
thanks, sir.
I'm just concerned that our next change out, we're going to be caught with our pants down, so to speak.
No, sir. If incineration is not allowed, it will be disposed of or stored in accordance with those regulations or process at that time. There's already, outside of the interim stormwater treatment system, processes in place across the country where PFAS, AFFF, contaminant waste is already stored on site at locations, and that is a procedure at the time and will be the procedure at the time for certain locations until a new method of disposal is created.
Thank you, Colonel.
Yes, of course.
Okay, Anthony Grice?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So this probably goes in line with what Mr. Fetter was thinking on the previous presentation. The interim stormwater treatment, when first put there, had some, I'll say, difficulties in capturing all of the stormwater, especially when it was high. And then there were some underground gunk, if you will, that was kind of gumming up the works. And so my question is, how has that been mitigated? Especially considering, the previous slide where there was the pink, but then the pink didn't go into RAC pond.
Doug, I'll let you talk to the, Doug, you can talk to the bag filters and that, but to the conversation that people have been talking about the conceptual site model, and Bill can chime in as well. That picture is just an example, not a true representation of what's going on at the site right at this moment. But I'm sure we'll be updated as the RI and CERCLA process goes forward. Doug, you can certainly talk to the update to the treatment system and the bag filters.
Yeah, and Mr. Grice is correct. It's still a challenge. You know, every season, every day, we continue to perform regular maintenance activities. The influent and effluent results speak for the capabilities of to treat. The water is really based on storm events, but we have found protocol and procedures that we are now, you know, 2 years into that alleviate some of the gunk that you mentioned, the biosolids that are created within the pond. It's just increased maintenance on our part, really, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read one of the questions from the submitted questions because it is from a RAB member and it's related to this presentation. Mike Shade asked whether all the snow we've been getting this winter has been impacting the system in any way.
Mr. Shade, yes, is the quick answer. The fall season that we talked about in this one is more rain. And as if you remember, much like your snow that you're struggling with in the winter months, you had tropical storms and hurricanes that came through. So the rain seasons in the fall are a little more impactful than our snow. The snow that you received over the cyclone, the bomb cycle, it raised our pond a little bit. We were able to continue to draw it down. We're currently running right around 1.5 to 2 inches below the weir. So we've been able to hold off some of those snowstorms through our pump and treat process.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I'm not seeing any other raised hands at this time from RAB members, so we'll move on to the next slide, please. And the next slide. So now is the time for just some RAB member open discussion. RAB members can review any other remediation questions or concerns that they have and propose topics for the April meeting. Following this, we'll move on to addressing the questions received that have not yet been answered in the from the public. So Bill, I can see that you have your hand raised. Bill Fetter. Go ahead and unmute yourself, sir. There you go.
Thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know that in April, first week of April 5th, there is a two-day conference in Marlborough, Mass. On the chemistry of PFAS. So if anybody is really intent, and that's being held, Doug, you may know the group, but New England Water Quality or something of that nature. I was just looking at the website and I didn't think to write down the name. But it is a two-day conference on PFAS if anybody's interested. In situ, it's going to be in person in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Any other questions or comments from RAB members right now? Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands, so we'll move on.
Can I ask my question now?
Oh, sure, yes, sir, Mr. Lawson, go ahead.
I wanted to go to the previous conversation. There was some I'll try to find the slide that Bill was going through, but it was related to deliberate effort to identify PFAS contamination off-site. I'm not using the exact, okay. Delineation to the full extent practical of PFAS impacts resulting from and mission-related activities through hydraulic pathways. So my question is what does that mean? And in keeping with offering some suggested conversations for next meetings, I think it would be helpful if the community was aware of how they could give and share information about possible impacts in communities, whether it was wells or other continued contamination, to determine what remediation meant beyond the snag, the Stewart Air National Guard base. So when you say delineation to the full extent practical, I do think it would be helpful to have an understanding of what that means, because those are really specific terms. And I think it would be helpful, or it would be something that the community would want to be participatory in some form or fashion. So maybe some thought can be given about what that looks like for the community to say, hey, we're seeing some impacts from what happened, and there should be some sort of process that I think we sort of work through.
Johanna, if you could go to slide 23, that's where that bullet is that he was speaking to. And Bill, you could glean out the questions there from what Mr. Lawson had to say.
Yeah, so to the extent practicable, we're not collecting, a sample every square feet, every square foot. We're bounding the plumes. We're getting it delineated where we know, okay, this is as far as it goes down gradient. Here's how wide it is. We know the specifics because of the groundwater flow, velocity, the direction, all those things. Got groundwater quality data to back it up. So we're not, over investigating is basically what that means. We're collecting enough information to make decisions because we don't need to delineate every square foot. We just need enough information to know the left and the right boundaries, how deep it goes, and how far it goes. Once we have that information, we can develop a remediation strategy through the, when we do our proposed plan and recommended remediation options. The delineation helps us with that. But so I don't know if that answers your question. It's not, we're not limiting what we're going to do.
I appreciate that. I guess I was being really specific and intentional because obviously you can't delineate every square foot, but if a community member said, I'm seeing some, or I believe that there's some, is there some sort of process that we can have in place that community members can share thoughts or concerns or concepts so that maybe those areas could be, and again, I would say the same thing. I don't expect you to check every sort of complaint, but I do think some thought should be given about process as relates to community and community comment about areas of concern. Can you speak to that, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, there's a process. These meetings are the process. So when we present information and someone thinks, oh, there's another source of PFAS out here, I mean, we're not going to turn a blind eye to it. I mean, if it's not our PFAS source, if it belongs to, some boot shop or someone that did a release somewhere, we're not going to go investigate other people's problems. That's why we have regulators. The regulators can go, I mean, we're working on the Air Guard releases at the base. So if there's other releases out there, the RRI will tell us if there's other sources coming onto the base, up gradient or side gradient. But at the end of the day, we're working from, we had our releases here and we're working to delineate those and to address those. There may be other sources of PFAS that we come out there and we're going, well, where'd this come from? This isn't anywhere near, what we're doing, or, where our releases were on the base. But there's always the potential. I mean, that's just like underground storage tanks. there's gas stations everywhere. I mean, there could be a petroleum plume coming from 2 gas stations down the road impacting someone else. Same thing with this PFAS. There could be other sources out there. So anyway, there's a process though. I mean, if someone brings something up, are we going to throw it into our plan right away? No, but we'll have a discussion. So I'm not sure what someone's going to provide information wise that would, concern, hey, I think I got PFAS in my groundwater. I mean, I'm not sure where you're coming with how to vet citizen concerns.
Yeah, somebody that may be in a watershed that has an issue or feels like there's an issue, and you haven't delineated yet. And just so we're real clear, I wouldn't be talking about anything that didn't emanate from the Stewart Air National Guard base. Obviously, if you didn't cause it, you wouldn't have to remediate it. So, I mean, we can discuss that.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out where. Someone says something.
If we have PFAS contamination from this remediation process about the Stewart Air National Guard base, my question is what is the process? And you said, well, you can bring it up at the meetings. But clearly, if it's not caused by the Stewart Air National Guard base, there would be no expectation. I would never suggest that. But if it is,
no, we own it. If it's coming from us, we're gonna. That's why we're doing this RI to delineate, the lateral and vertical extent of the releases that we had on the base. And
I mean, just to make the comment further, I mean, we just found out recently. So the delineation didn't begin until 2014, but it clearly the community was being impacted. So I just wanted to make the statement that there may be, and I just wanted to be clear because people in the community have come and asked and are concerned about wells, maybe not the city water contamination, but there might be wells. And I guess they're really then now, this prompts me to want to talk about, we need to have conversations around how do we determine what is the impact and what is the process. So I do think this merits more conversation and concern.
And I think
I would like to, go ahead.
No, I think when we do the remedial investigation, once we delineate it and we have that report, that's what you use for that discussion. That says here's how far the plume went, and we've if it's 1,500 feet to a quarter mile or whatever it is, the remedial investigation report provides those graphic illustrations like the figures and stuff that shows you here's what we're talking about. So you can actually get a visual understanding, because we're looking at under the subsurface, right? I mean, if we could see under the subsurface really well, it would be really easy, but we can't. So we're using these physical methods to collect these samples. So, but the RI report will definitely tell the story, and it'll definitely aid and facilitate in that discussion that you're talking about. To let people know where it is and where it isn't. Another avenue for folks outside of the RAB is the regulators. So Justin Starr and Wendy from the Department of Health, if they have a concern or an issue with groundwater quality or their drinking water, I mean, they can talk to those folks as well. I mean, that's just another avenue. I mean, that's what the regulators are there for. So,
thank you.
Yep, and this is Wendy. Like you said, if there is a concern about private wells, people feel free to give me a call. I'd be happy to look at the location of the well that's in question and see how it relates to the information we have so far, and certainly have it on our radar as we go forward and get more information on it.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. Bill Fetter, you have your hands. We have a couple more questions. Bill, go ahead.
To rephrase Ed's question, if once you delineate the zone of influence and somebody's residential well is in that zone, you would investigate that well. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, if our plume goes down gradient and it goes under someone's house and they've got a residential well and that residential well screened in the, whether it's in deep bedrock or if it's
Right.
shallow, wherever, if we think that it's going to impact that well, we would go out and sample that.
I think that's the underlying question. So thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Mike Shade.
Hey, yeah, just going back to the timeline and next steps, just kind of knowing where you guys are looking to move over the next 6 months or so. There's going to be these quarterly meetings with DEC, Department of Health. You guys are working on the QAP, or your consultant is. I know one of the questions on the agenda right now is topics for the April meeting. Just curious, what do you think you'll be able to share in terms of the status of the QAP at the April meeting? Like, would one be able to present like a draft plan, or what could we expect to hear on the development of the QAP at that time by April, knowing that you're aiming to have a draft by May? So just curious, what we might expect in April in terms of what you might be able to share.
Right, and I think what we could share, since we ideally, if let's say if AECOM got done early, obviously we'd be able to talk about, here's the draft UFB QAP. But if they didn't, I think one thing that we could probably share and talk about is kind of do like an overview of, here's some of the soil sampling locations, here's some of the surface soil, here's some of the surface water, showing maps and figures. Pictures tell a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to see a picture when we're proposing to do some of these things. I think by that point in time, we should be able to share that kind of information and maybe talk a little bit about, so in the fall, here's our delineation approach. Here's how we're going to attempt to, how we're going to delineate the groundwater plume. We're going to use, this drilling technology, and here's the locations that we're plotting out to start out with our initial look. And then based upon that, information drives your decisions and next moves, right? So, but we can show plans and figures for the initial sampling locations for all those different media types, and then even talk about the DQOs. This is why we're doing these soil samples and sediment samples here. Because by then, when the regulator's getting it, they should already know what we're doing, because we've kind of proposed it. But we'll have definitely a lot more detail to be able to talk about that. So I think that would probably be a good talking point, to talk about the different media sampling locations that were proposed, to kind of show some figures, just to kind of give an initial, here's the first going out of the gate, what we're attempting to do. And that'll give you a good idea of kind of where we're going. After that, it's all data-driven decisions. We get results back. Oh, shoot. We still got hits of PFAS in the groundwater. We need to go further down. So we'll do some more work further down gradient. Or same with the soil source areas. Oh, wow, we got it delineated, or no, we didn't. So anyway, I think we should be able to show some figures of that to help kind of illustrate where we're initially starting to look and what we're going to be doing for at least the first phase in the fall of 22, just to kind of give you an idea of some of the activities in that. So if that's reasonable.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think that sounds wonderful. I was hoping that that's what you would have to say.
Okay, good. I answered the question right.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Jennifer Rollison, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of Ed a little bit, and maybe just bring back some perspective to this. I mean, we're here diving deep into science and technical terms, and we're talking about delineation and timelines that are probable and what's feasible, how far you might want to go for something. At the end of the day, when we talk about community, we're talking about people, we're talking about families, we're talking about health. And that's what this is about. And I just hope that remains center of all of these conversations. This is a great technical challenge for your crews, and we appreciate everything. But at the end of the day, it's about the health and safety of our community, which are people and children. So I just needed to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised from RAB members. So we'll move on. I know we're somewhere back to around slide 34, something like that, Johanna. I know at this point, we're ready to move on to public comments. So this is a RAB open discussion. Keep going, a couple. So at this point, so we have received a couple of questions through the question module that have not yet been answered that we said we would get to in the queue. So this question is about the RI. During the RI phase, will data be presented to the RAB and the public as it becomes known by the Air National Guard or Jacobs, but I want to clarify that Jacobs is just the facilitator. What are the procedures that the Air National Guard will follow before releasing data to the RAB and the public?
So as we get data, so let's say what I foresee with the RAB is, let's say we start the investigation in the fall, probably won't have any data for the October meeting, but come December, we're going to have some data that we can present. Here's what we found so far to date. And we can present, right information like that, because we're going to be working with the regulators, having meetings with them, talking about it as we collect the data. It's going to be, a data-driven decision making, but we should be able to share maps and figures once we have validated data, and we can put it on a figure and show you here's what we got to date for soil or sediment or surface water. But as it goes, we'll provide that as we collect the information. Now, is it going to come out instantaneously? No. I mean, we got to have validated data, and that takes time when they go to the laboratory to go through that validation process. But as we get validated data, we'll be able to put figures and tables together to kind of show you what we're finding. I mean, are we going to show all the data? No. I mean, we're collecting it. There's going to be volumes and volumes of information that we're going to be putting together, but I think figures and tables is the way to go. And as we collect it and we hit, the RAB meeting, we'll present what we have to give you an update, just like what we're doing right now.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And to those of you who asked the question, if you have a follow-up or if the response doesn't entirely answer your question, please go ahead and we've got a few minutes left. You can follow up in the question module. Next question, will the Washington Lake ever be a viable water source for the Newburgh, New Windsor area?
Who's that question for?
Well, I mean, it seems like it's looking at the future of what, the results of the RI would help determine that. So
yeah, I think
Bill or
we'll look at surface water interaction with the the conceptual site model, and we're going to be collecting some data on that. And I mean, at the end of the day, with remediation, once you come up with a solution, you're trying to remove those source areas. So right now we would be looking at ways, once we do the RI and know what we're contributing and how it's contributing and how it's being transported via, the different mechanisms, whether it's surface water infiltration down to the groundwater or through a stormwater pipe. I mean, we're going to look at ways of eliminating those sources. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's the goal, is to try to get rid of those sources to prevent, contamination from impacting groundwater. So soil sources and sources of AFFF contamination are what we're going to try to delineate, and then identify a remediation process to eliminate those sources. Once those sources are eliminated, then we'll have to address what's in the groundwater, obviously. But if you don't address the soil sources or the contamination sources, it's just going to continue to leach and cause a problem. So once we get done with the RI and identify what that is, we'll come up with remedies to address those things. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, once we remove those source areas, that'll address the Air National Guard piece to what's contributing to the contamination. So it's going to take a while, but at the end of the day, that's the goal that we're trying to strive for.
Okay, thanks. Next question. For clarification, is it possible for additional interim measures to be conducted during the RIFS phase? For example, repair of breaches in the on-site stormwater conveyance systems, et cetera.
Yes, it is possible, and I think I'll have to refer to I don't know, Colonel Cook or Mike Ottinger if there's anything in the works for looking at that. I know the 17K bypass is definitely something that's going to help with what's going on under the ground with the stormwater and that. But Mike Ottinger, are you on?
Bill, we are working with the DOT to get that 17K project moving along as quickly as possible. It is off our installation, so we have no control over that. If any of the DOT folks are on and like to share their perspective, I'd greatly appreciate that. As far as the pipeline to the base, we are looking at those options, but we also need the RI to help us figure out the best way of doing that. Some of these pipes, you got to keep in mind, are 30, 40, 50 feet down. They're not normal roadside pipes, for example. Mike, you got anything else?
I would agree with you, sir, and we are looking at some options of some more shallow stormwater pipes, but we're kind of just looking and assessing and putting some projects together for that.
Okay, thanks. The next question from the submitted questions. New York State has listed PFAS as a hazardous substance, and EPA is expected to follow suit, listing PFAS as a CERCLA or RCRA hazardous waste. Hold on. Sorry. How may these regulations affect being able to store the PFAS media on-site and off-site?
Well, with us being under CERCLA, if it's investigative derived waste, as long as we keep it on site, there shouldn't be any issues with that, because CERCLA allows us to keep the investigative waste on site until we dispose of it. Now, I don't know, Rich, if you want to add to that, if you got a different perspective or.
No, that's a true statement.
Okay, thanks. The next question. Given that the remediation is going to take 10 plus years from release, how will the migration of PFAS be tracked? Should there be a moratorium on large development on 300 near the site?
You say that one more time in the form of a question?
Given that the remediation is going to take 10 plus years, how will the migration of PFAS be tracked? Should there be a moratorium on large development on 300 near the site? I'm not sure what the 300 part refers to, but
that must be like a property or adjacent or something.
Okay.
Route 300 is a main thoroughfare past Stewart property.
Thank you.
Property.
So the migration of PFAS, it's through the monitoring. So when we put it in the monitoring wells and we delineate the plume, we'll monitor, concentrations. So even if, so let's say the RI takes 2 years, even after the RI is done, we still will do continual monitoring to make sure that our concentrations aren't increasing or if they're decreasing, or so we monitor the concentrations in the groundwater. As far as limiting development in that, it all depends on if I don't think people are going to be drinking the water, the groundwater that's underneath the wherever the plume is. But if they are, I mean, then we would restrict, working with the regulators, they would restrict, the land use until the plume's actually remediated. So, but we're ways from that but I think working with the regulators and that, they, that'll be part of the remedy that we come up with.
Okay, thanks, Bill. This question gets back to the stormwater conveyance system. While the UFP QAP and APP is being prepared, can the investigation and video surveillance of the stormwater conveyance system continue?
I think that's part of our RI. We're going to actually go look at some more of the storm pipes. That's part of the scope of work that AECOM is going to be doing. So on base for us, that's part of the RI piece. Unless there's something else that we're doing above and beyond that. Mike Ottinger, can you answer that?
Yeah, Bill, exactly what you said. We're looking at some of those stormwater pipes that were identified as part of the ESI. But further than that, we're just going to wait and see what happens with the remedial investigation.
Yeah, and part of the RI is looking at some of those pipes and doing some more video surveillance and looking at where there might be cracks that may be causing some of the releases. So.
Okay, thanks, Bill. This next question is related to the interim stormwater treatment system. Doug, why aren't the inflow numbers going down as the water is cleaned? It's coming in at 300 parts per trillion, going out at nearly 0. Why isn't that making a dent? Is the source of PFAS still uncapped?
Well, I mean, it is untapped, and we also still continue to see during periods of storm or high inflow coming through the storm drain system, we see water that we can't pump. So if you look at our chart, the next slide, you can see where the red line is the top of the weir elevation. So when it's hovering around that and we can't get it below that, that means that there's more storm water than our system can achieve or reach or draw down. Part of the interim look that we're all talking about, the diversion of 17K, will reduce some of that, and our system as it stands today could start seeing more recovery when we're hovering around the weir elevation. And continue to make more and more of a dent.
Okay, thanks, Doug. The next question gets back to disposal practices. The thermal process, quote unquote, that Calgon is using to separate GAC from the it says AAAF, but the AFFF or the PFAS, does that include burning materials?
It is a thermal destructive, I'll call it an incinerator for the lack of the right word. It's equipped with special abatement systems, and those performance standards are monitored by both federal and state regulators to meet their emission standards. PFAS is still a developing regulation, so part of our discussion earlier, it all plays into all of this. But I think what I was trying to answer was, the system is approved. It does take out the PFAS chemical, and emissions are abated through their abatement systems, air scrubbing and techniques that knock down the emissions.
Okay, thanks, Doug. The next question, will the vertical gradient in Washington Lake be investigated at the start of the RI?
Yeah, this is Bill Meyer. I'm not sure if that's part of the initial investigation because we're looking at the interconnection coming from off the base and that. I think initially we're just going to be collecting samples, surface water samples on base and some off to try to get an understanding of that. But that interaction, I don't think that's going to be something that we need to collect right off the bat. I mean, we'll look at the groundwater flow and whether it's interconnected with does the groundwater feed into the Lake Washington as a recharging source, because sometimes surface water bodies can either be a recharging source or a discharging source. So Lake Washington could be discharging to the groundwater depending on conditions. Most of the time, groundwater tables feed into surface water bodies, but as far as vertical gradients and that, and I don't think that'll be something that's initially looked at. And there might be some published data that we'll be able to pull related to that, but I don't think initially we'll be looking at a vertical gradient or in Lake Washington, unless something drives us to look at that.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I want to read, this is not a question, but a comment from Kate Lins. Kate is with the Air Force, but it's related to the GAC treatment that Doug was just speaking to in the last question. She typed in, GAC treatment is not incineration. It's regulated under subpart 10, or I think that's 10X in RCRA. It's not subject to the moratorium in the NDAA. So I just wanted to share that she had typed that in. I don't think Kate's available to speak. So another question, hold on, I just lost it. The question is, why aren't all stormwater pipes going to be video investigated?
They are on the base. They've already done some as part of the expanded site investigation. The RI is going to pick up what we haven't done. So as far as my knowledge, I mean, that's what we're looking at, is where we weren't able to get video footage is what we're going to be looking at.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. And Jennifer Rollison just typed in that GAC treatment is not our concern. The incineration of the waste material is. So she just wanted to clarify on that issue.
Okay.
That brings us to the end of the written questions. So, so moving on to our next slide then. So if there are additional questions, there is a process to submit your questions. Victoria Lung, her email address is right here. She takes those questions on behalf of the RAB, and questions will be accepted until February 18th. Any written questions that are submitted after this meeting will be included in the meeting minutes along with a response. So I just wanted to let you know what the process is for that. If you have additional questions, you can submit those to Victoria. So thank you, Victoria, for taking that on. And again, will be responded to in the meeting minute package. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'm just gonna just turn it back over to our co-chairs for closing with a reminder that our next meeting is April 27th. Colonel Cook?
Amy, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's participated tonight. We look forward to continuing to move this forward as quickly as possible in conjunction with our partners and the community. We are active members of our communities. We live and work here, and we, as well as everyone else online, want to see this this issue cleared up as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we are fully invested, and we'll continue to do our best to be good stewards of our community. Thank you. And Mr. Lawson, over to you.
Thank you. I think it's really important that our audio always matches our video. And so what we say and what we do needs to be in sync. I think I would be remiss if I didn't point out that our community is in pain and suffering, and Newburgh is one of the most exposed PFAS communities in the country. And so I think part of what you hear on these calls is a community in dire need of answers, and dire need of understanding, and dire need of being clear about how we can get through this issue. And so we appreciate the patience, but we will continue to be diligent in our efforts to hold folks accountable. And so I hope that it doesn't offend anyone, but be sure that there are people who are serious about this and seriously concerned about the health and the welfare of their children. And so this is not something that we take very lightly, and we thank all of the SNAG members and all of the officials for their hard work. But remember, this is not just about remediating places and spaces. This is also about healing and creating wholeness in community. So thank you, Colonel Cook, for your words. And we all should hold each other accountable to ensure that those words also become part of what we do and how we go through this process. So thank you all for your attention and your time. And we look forward for your continued attention and time. And I would like for, we had started a process of meeting prior and in between our meetings, and Colonel Cook and Amy, I would like to try to maybe get that going again, just so we can continue to make sure that our audio matches our video. Thank you and good night to everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Lawson. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining this meeting of the Stewart Air National Guard Base Restoration Advisory Board meeting. Again, we will be issuing this meeting on YouTube, and if you have follow-on questions, please submit them to Victoria. Thank you very much and good night.